everlasting grave. Alleluia. So we know where Christ has led. Alleluia. Following our exalted head. Alleluia. May like him we rise. Alleluia. As the cross, the grave, the skies. Alleluia.
Welcome to another virtual worship opportunity with Epworth United Methodist Church in Concord on Easter, April the 12th of the year 2020, a year we've been relying on the perfect division of the risen Christ to lead us in this year. Our Easter morning reading is from the Gospel of John, chapter 20, verses 1 through 18. Early in the morning of the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. She ran to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said, "They've taken the Lord from the tomb, and we don't know where they've put him." Peter and the other disciple left to go to the tomb. They were running together, but the other disciple ran faster than Peter and was the first to arrive at the tomb. Bending down to take a look, he saw the linen cloths lying there, but didn't go in. Following him, Simon Peter entered the tomb and saw the linen cloths lying there. He also saw the face cloth that had been on Jesus' head. It wasn't with the other clothes, but was folded up in its own place. Then the other disciple, the one who arrived at the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. They didn't yet understand the scripture that Jesus must rise from the dead. And then the disciples returned to the place where they were staying. Mary stood outside near the tomb crying, and as she cried, she bent down to look into the tomb. She saw two angels dressed in white seated where the body of Jesus had been, one at the head, one at the foot. And the angels asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" She replied, "They've taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they've put him." And as soon as she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she didn't know it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who are you looking for?" And thinking he was the gardener, she replied, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. And Jesus said to her, "Don't hold on to me, for I haven't yet gone up to my Father. Go to my brothers and sisters and tell them, I'm going to my Father and your Father, to my God and to your God." And Mary Magdalene left and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And then she told them what he said to her. There's a theologian of old who said, when people come to listen for the Easter message, the only question that's on their mind is it true? Was Jesus resurrected from the dead? I can tell you that question was not being pondered by Peter and John before the dawn on the third day before Jesus was crucified. Peter and John couldn't have processed the possibility of such a question. After the flurry of events of the week, after Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem at the beginning of the week, the disciples were failing in their attempt to process what had been happening across the next few days. Jesus falsely accused, abused, leaving them completely confused as to what was happening, what he had told them, that he had to go there to die. There was Jesus' insistence that he must wash the dirt from their feet before breaking the bread that he said symbolized what was about to happen to his body, and the cup of wine lifted up, representing the lifeblood about to be poured out for them, for the new covenant to address the sins of the world, followed by soldiers coming into the dark garden to tear Jesus away from them. And after they denied knowing him, the shock of seeing him nailed to the cross, all of which must assuredly have made them sick and distraught in a nauseous mix of adrenaline and fear and unprocessed terror, into a sieve of grief and sleep deprivation and the complete inability to process or to function. And so it's easy to see why they weren't at the tomb on that Sunday morning. They were locked into a near rigor mortis of inaction and fear. But Mary Magdalene, having had a lifetime of tormenting demons before Jesus had torn them out of her and cast them away for good, Mary was the epitome of survivor, just crazy enough to risk everything to walk through the darkest hour to Jesus' tomb and take care of the female's undertaker task of applying the myrrh and the aloe ointment to Jesus' corpse that had been left on the preparation slab the day before. You remember Jesus' corpse had been removed from the cross after the soldier thrust the long spear up under Jesus' rib cage to pierce his lungs and his heart for the blood and the water to pour out, before they took him down and took him to the tomb on that Sabbath, that Friday, when the tomb was sealed up, awaiting their return. So as Mary arrived at the tomb, a day and a half later, at dawn's first light, she finds the immense stone that's used to seal the tomb opening has been rolled away. And the corpse she's come to put her hands on to wash and anoint, it's missing. If you've been missing sports in this time of the coronavirus pandemic, you're going to love all of the sprints that are a part of the rest of the reading. So Mary Magdalene then sprints back to where she had been staying to awaken Peter and John so that they can come and see. And the three of them then race back to the tomb, where John makes sure we know that he is the one who won the foot race, but he stays outside to peer into the tomb from a distance. And then Peter runs past him and goes inside to see up close for himself the grave clothes folded, neatly placed to the side, as though someone was thoughtfully trying to make the point these would not be needed. They could be used for someone else. And then John, in his own account, tells us that he finally came into the tomb, that he could start the process of believing, not yet fully understanding. And then the guys race back to where they've been staying, leaving Mary right back where she had been before, all by herself, before an empty tomb, trying to grapple with the unfathomable. And suddenly, as she peers in, two angels appear, and they appear to have delight with her, asking her what it is she's looking for. And she says, "Where's the body of Jesus?" She wants to know. And then behind her, Jesus calls her by name, Mary. Mary now, no longer mistaking Jesus for the gardener, seeks to grab hold of him. She must still be focused on her undertaking duties, wanting to be able to help his body. But now it's standing and talking to her. But then the risen Christ frees her from that, helps her to understand he still has some ascending yet to do. And he directs her to go and tell the disciples what they have overlooked in their haste. And so to pinpoint the directives that Jesus gives on the very day, at the very moment in the history of the world when faith in the risen Christ begins, Jesus commissions a woman to share the world's first sermon as she returns to the house to answer their essential Easter question, is it true? Mary delivers a short, precise message, driving home the central point: I have seen the Lord. Is it true? Well, one thing to note is we don't have to decide based upon what happened on this first Easter morning, because the church calendar allows us 7 more weeks, 7 more Sundays where the risen Christ continues to appear before other people who may be doubting, like doubting Thomas, for instance, so that each one of them might have their own time to begin their believing while not yet fully understanding. And speaking of those who have additional Easter experiences, the Apostle Paul wrote that the risen Christ had appeared to more than 500 persons before he finally ascended. That same Paul was counted among more than 6,000 Christians who early historians recorded as having gone to their death as martyrs in the first few centuries of Roman rule. And if you're doing the math, they've gone from 500 eyewitnesses to more than 6,000 spiritually perceiving witnesses of Jesus willing to die rather than to renounce their faith. You see, Easter is not simply external historical proof, it's rather about an internal reality made possible by choice, a decision made by you. And when you choose to consider the possibility that God wants nothing more than to be into your world, where you are today, for your own Easter, where you can begin believing, not yet fully understanding, well, an irrepressible hope emerges, an uncontainable joy. What's it like? A 20th century playwright named Gene O'Neill put his new realization of resurrection into a play that he wrote called The Laughter of Lazarus. In the play, he imagines what would have happened if just days after Jesus was crucified, Lazarus, the brother of Mary and Martha, what would happen if he was brought before Pilate and the other authorities in order to be questioned. And so the play begins with Lazarus being forced to provide a testimony before them about what it is that Jesus had done to bring him back to life. You remember he had been in the tomb for 4 days. And what Lazarus himself had seen on the other side of death. In O'Neill's play, every time the authorities demand an answer from Lazarus, Lazarus, in his trying to put unlimited eternity and glory and resurrection into mere words, just simply laughs. It's an uncontrollable response. And in the play, every time that Lazarus laughs, he gets younger and younger and younger. And while each time the authorities, the commanders, demand proof of him, they get immensely older and older to the point of finding themselves at rigor mortis. So Lazarus walks out. And as the crowds begin to gather and move around him, every time they gather to demand proof, Lazarus again does his best to try to answer, but what comes instead of words is just laughter. How do you put the reality of resurrection into mere words? The playwright said his inspiration was the realization that what had happened in him, this elation, this jubilation about the reality of Easter at work in him, had been happening for 2,000 years. Uncontainable joy that was shared from generation to generation to generation, a reality, a truth of burgeoning joy that he could not contain. The truth of Easter begins with a decision to begin a journey of blessed possibility, to be a willing sojourner in a life of faith. But there are roadblocks from people ever getting started in that journey. They're sometimes labeled as pride or unyielding reason that refuses to acknowledge that there can be divine mystery that's beyond the limits of our knowledge, or the assumption that we must surely have superior intellect to those who lived before us. And all of that masks something that's underlying, and that is fear. One fear in starting an intentional journey of faith is, what happens if I start looking and I can't find God? The result is, what's the use of it all? What's the point in living? But then perhaps the greater fear is that, what happens if I do find God? That God is there for me, and in ongoing encounters more is asked of me than I can now fathom. Know this: Easter is found by the courageous, by the curious, those who will risk enough to find out for themselves in a genuine, dedicated search, who start out the whole process believing while not yet fully understanding, as John described it. Is it true that Easter happened, that it has a historic moment of an undeniable, verifiable fact? Well, let's face it, the facts of things that happened in the past, they aren't dependent upon our belief. They simply are. But beyond facts is truth. And the truth that is important to God is that Easter happened for us. The moment we decide, when we are ready to begin to discover the truth of God for ourselves, that starts with giving permission for God's resurrection to begin to be at work in us. So Easter is the beginning of wonder and possibility for real life, a readiness for change, for an end to the life as the same old, same old. It is for you and for me a willingness to be there for God, to kneel with one's heart and one's mind and one's whole life in confession. Lord, my life is too small, too limited. It is to seek for God to fill you and to teach you and direct you. It is to dare to open yourself fully to God in order to be remade. It is to roll away the stone that conceals the emptiness inside you and invite the light of Christ, the glory of resurrection, to begin to fill it. Once you do, the truth, the evidence that same God who resurrected Jesus from the dead now provides you your own Easter day and gets you up and running into a new life of certain hope, of unbounded elation, of uncontrollable laughter and joy. But to gain the truth, to have within yourself the proof, it cannot happen without your permission and your participation with God to begin this new work in you as you explore and seek to learn and to grow in your new faith. When you do, you are enfolded in the community of saints, that great cloud of witnesses who have shared their joy across the centuries, as you, along with them, echo that very first sermon on the original Easter morning. I've seen the Lord. The Lord is risen. And we respond together, He is risen indeed. Amen.